Hi, I'm Mary Crowley, and this is The Art Show. Today we are going to be talking about Calvin Coolidge, the man, the historic site, and the foundation. And I have four people here to make it clear what you can see at Plymouth Notch, Vermont. As my husband says, he was a trustee of the foundation. The historic site and the foundation, he thinks, are the best kept secret in Vermont. There are some people who just don't know about this place, and you need to because it's very, very exciting. I am going to give you a very brief intro to Coolidge. He grew up in the tiny village of Plymouth Notch, which still looks pretty much today the way it did when he was there growing up. He was educated in Vermont and at Amherst College, and then he moved to Northampton, Massachusetts, and became a lawyer. He ran for one elected office after another in Northampton, and then at the state level until he became governor. And he might have stopped right there, except for the fact that there was a police strike in Boston. And he fired the policeman and called in the National Guard. He got national attention and thereafter became vice presidential nominee with Warren Harding, and then afterward president. His wife, whom you can see here behind me, was Grace, and she was a lovely, interesting lady in her own right, but we don't have a lot of time to talk about her, so I'll just mention her because it's quite a photograph. Bill Jenny is going to be speaking first. He is, and this is quite a title, Regional Historic Site Administrator of the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation at the President Calvin Coolidge State Historic Site. Just so you know that this is an historic site. So Bill, let me just ask you one question after another and see if you can give people an idea of when they can get there, what they can see, and what's going on. First, what are the days and the hours of operation?
We're basically open from late May to mid-October. So this year it's May 28th through October 16.
And this show is going to run for the month of June and maybe a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So that's perfect timing.
Great. And so we are open every day during that time period, 9:30 to 5.
9:30 to 5.
We suggest that folks allow at least 2 hours when they visit because they'll see an awful lot while they're there.
I agree. What buildings are there?
We have one modern building, that's our Museum and Education Center, and that's where we have our special exhibits, and then our orientation film is shown there. Then folks generally progress right up into the historic village, and that's preserved virtually as it was in the early 20th century, and so the town is as Coolidge knew it, so it includes his birthplace, his boyhood home, the home of his mother, his father, his grandparents, all the neighbors, associated barns, the village church, the cheese factory, the list goes on and on.
How many people live there, do you know? I didn't read that.
At the time Coolidge was president, there were 29 residents of Plymouth Notch.
Okay. Yes, it was a tiny village.
Right. And of course, when he became president, the village became world famous. Not just because of the Presidential Association, but folks were very curious to see this little village that was considered quaint even in the 1920s. And literally thousands of people started coming in almost every day to check it out. And so, of course, that was quite an impact on this little town.
Well, my mother and father lived in New Jersey, and it was decades ago, and they were thrilled to go there. They didn't know about it before they came up to visit me. And there was no big education and museum center then. Mm-hmm. But it was still what it is today. You get it, the flavor.
It's like stepping back in time.
Absolutely it is.
And I liken it to Vermont's Brigadoon.
Okay.
And
yes,
you can really get a feeling of how Vermont used to be when you go there. As I said, all the buildings are in their original locations. Many of them have their contents intact from the 1920s. The only change to the village actually is that the road is now paved. And that's largely because the town post office is still located in the village, as it has been in that building since 1855.
Okay. What do you do as administrator?
Well, I am the only full-time staff member there, and so my job is a mix of everything. And so one minute I'm administrator, the next I'm doing exhibit work, curatorial. I put together all the exhibits for the site and also supervise a seasonal staff of about 20 folks. The museum stores are under my wing as well, and so I do the purchasing for those.
There is one exhibit that's up all the time?
Our
That's a
permanent
question.
exhibit.
Yes. And what can one see in the permanent exhibit?
That one we call More Than Two Words, and that is kind of based on the famous story that we think is true. Vice President Coolidge often had to go to dinner parties as part of his obligations, and he was apparently seated next to a woman who told him that she had a bet with someone that she could get him to say more than 2 words during the dinner, and his response was, "You lose." And that was it. And so she lost the bet.
Great little story.
We hope, though, that after folks go through the exhibit, they realize that he had a lot more to say. It was just that he was not into the dinner party chit-chat scene.
Right.
And if you get into a study of Coolidge, as Matt and the others from the Coolidge Foundation will tell you, he was the talkative president, and he could go on if you got him on the right subject. But he wasn't into idle chatter.
But he must have been able to form his thoughts and articulate them, because he wouldn't have been elected to all the offices that he was if he weren't able to do that.
It's really a remarkable step up the ladder, literally.
Absolutely it is. Mm-hmm. As I did the research, I realized there were things I didn't know. All right, what's the history of the site?
In 1948, the Vermont Historic Sites Commission was started, and one of its principal goals was to preserve Calvin Coolidge's birthplace. And so at that time, the state of Vermont acquired Calvin's mother's family home and the large barn associated with it, and operated the home of his mother as an information center and a lunchroom, and then acquired a rather large collection of late 19th century agricultural equipment to display in the barn. And the state continued operations there, making improvements to the town cemetery where Calvin Coolidge is buried.
Right, which is also an interesting thing.
Right.
To see his tombstone there is...
It's very simple, as you might suspect
Yes.
it would be for Calvin Coolidge, unlike his immediate predecessor. And anyway, they made improvements for accessibility to the gravesite. And so John Coolidge was impressed by all of that effort, John being the son of the president.
Right.
And so in 1956, he donated the Coolidge homestead and its contents to the state. And then he started buying some of the adjacent properties over the years, and we gradually bought them from him. So basically, the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation owns most of the historic village, with the exception of the church.
And why don't you own the church? I asked Art last night, he didn't know.
That is owned by the Calvin Coolidge Memorial or Foundation. At the time, it was offered to us, but they were still having services at the church. And so that would have been a problem for separation of church and state.
Okay.
So they offered it to the Coolidge Foundation, and that's the one building I don't have to worry about at the site.
Good. Well, that's good.
So we now basically, as I said, own most of the historic village. It includes about 25 historic structures and 600 acres of land.
Okay. Is there one last thing you'd like to mention?
We have a lot going on at the site this summer. Our temporary exhibit is going to be featuring the presidential gifts, the things that were given to him by both world leaders as well as just plain folk. So it'll be a mix of the gold and the glitter and some very modest things as well. And we think that that's going to be really quite a hit. We have to follow in the tradition now. We've established a number of fine exhibits over the years that have been supported by the Alma Gibbs Donchian Foundation. And last year's show was on Grace Coolidge's fashion. And that's what this image behind us here was from. As you can see, she was a very elegantly dressed First Lady. So this year we'll have that, as well as a number of special events. July 4th, which the Coolidge Foundation does most of the activities there. And then we have a Plymouth Old Home Day in August, a Folk and Blues Festival in early September, an Antique Apple Fest in early October. And so the list goes on and on. So we hope folks
So
can
there are
come
lots
and
of
visit.
activities. Thank you, Bill.
You're very welcome.
Matt Denhart is next. He is the executive director of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, which is at the historic site. Matt, I know you think it's important for people to know about Coolidge. Why? He was the 30th president. That's a long time ago. Why now?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask us that, what's so great about Coolidge? And we say, well, we know he's cool, and we think it's important that we show the rest of the country and beyond the lessons that Coolidge has for our country. They're still relevant today. He was president from 1923 to 1929, as you mentioned. He served as America's 30th president, first as vice president to Warren Harding, and then later, after Harding unexpectedly died, Coolidge became president. And actually, something that Bill didn't mention, when folks come to the historic village, they can see the room where he was sworn into office by his own father.
And I will just hold this up, and if I can get to it, here we go. And if Chris can get it. This is Coolidge's father sitting in the room where Coolidge took the oath of office from his father, a notary public, and that was the Bible that was used and the same lamp. And it was very simple.
It was very simple.
They were simple people.
That's right. They were simple people.
But bright.
And bright and
with
hardworking.
solid values.
With very solid values. And so, it's those values that we think are so important still today that I think many Americans feel are lacking and we long for. Coolidge really focused on civility. You can look, and we've looked, and you don't see instances of Coolidge denigrating his opponents. In fact, he had said that he learned very early on in one of his very first campaigns that you're much more successful as a public leader if you, when you're campaigning, talk about the virtues of yourself rather than the negative aspects of your opponents. So that's something that all of us
longing for.
that we really long for. But he had many accomplishments too. I think he's sometimes forgotten because he wasn't a wartime president. He followed World War I. And we did face, many challenges of the nation anyway. We had a large debt. Taxes had to have been raised to fund at least some of the war effort. And Coolidge, and then there was a deep recession in 1920 that Coolidge and Harding had to confront. And then after Harding died, that Coolidge had to continue to address. And under Coolidge, he's the last president to actually reduce the size of the federal budget. So when he left office, the government was spending less than it was when he came in. He also managed to reduce taxes dramatically. So he balanced the budget
What a good
while
thing.
also cutting taxes.
Yeah. How did the foundation come about? There was a historic site, and then the foundation, right?
So Bill mentioned the early days of the historic site, and John Coolidge, the Coolidge's elder son, was very instrumental in creating the foundation as well. In 1960, he joined with a group of other Coolidge enthusiasts who thought that there should be some kind of private organization that existed to help preserve Coolidge's legacy and to teach through educational efforts other Americans the legacy of his father and the country's 30th president. So the foundation, like I said, was founded in 1960 and has been going strong since. It's today is based in Plymouth Notch. We share an office space with the historic site, and over the years have really partnered to help support the site's efforts to preserve the history that's there.
And you also have some wonderful programs. Do you want to mention? I mean, I wrote down the debates, scholarships, essays.
Right, absolutely. And so since the site and the state of Vermont do such a fabulous job of welcoming visitors, our mission really is to bring more people, but also to then expand the reach around the country through educational programs. So our brand new program is our Coolidge Scholars Program, which we think is the most generous scholarship in all of America. It's for 4 years. It's a full ride scholarship. The winners can students apply as a high school junior, and the winners can take that scholarship to any college or university in America for 4 years of study.
So exciting.
And then our other major program, it's something, it actually is part of the legacy that you talked about, that Coolidge, although he's known as Silent Cal, he had a lot to say, especially meaningful things to say. And Mary, when you were speaking with Bill, you said he must have learned to articulate himself well. And he did. In fact, it was through debate and public speaking that he really found his voice and became a leader. And so in that same legacy and tradition of Coolidge, we sponsor a big debate program for high school students. So high school debaters come from all over the country.
Which is very exciting.
Every summer. Yeah. And actually we invite all of you who are here in the in the greater neighborhood of Plymouth Notch to come and judge. We're always looking for volunteer judges who come and evaluate these debates. We give scholarships to the winners. But really what we do is we challenge them to think about public policy and to evaluate both sides of an issue and to learn to articulate their own views in a civil way that's productive rather than some of the uncivil kind of political discourse that unfortunately we see so much today.
True. Thank you. Appreciate. We didn't get to everything I wanted to, but I knew we wouldn't because I wanted to have all four of you here today. So thank you for coming, Bill. Thank you, Matt. And there is the historic site online, and there's the foundation online. Right. And there will also be graphics that will make it clear what this is all about.
Thank you, Mary.
Rashad Thomas is Program and Editorial Associate of the Vermont Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. He knows a lot about Coolidge's life, and I just gave a very short version of the life. But if you could fill us in, Coolidge the boy, anything about growing up in the Notch, after Amherst, becoming president, anything that you want to highlight?
Absolutely. Well, Calvin Coolidge was born in Plymouth Notch on the 4th of July, 1872. He is our only president who is a Yankee Doodle dandy, born on the 4th of July. And when he was a child, he thought that all the parades and celebrations and fireworks that took place on the 4th of July were just to celebrate him, his birthday. And he went to the little one-room schoolhouse in Plymouth Notch until he got to high school. And he went to the Black River Academy in Ludlow, Vermont, for 4 years for high school. And then
he had to board there, didn't he?
He did, yes, yes. There were no cars and that sort of thing in those days, so he'd go down at the beginning of the week to Ludlow and stay in a boarding house through his high school years. And then after high school, he decided to attend Amherst College. He tried to take the entrance exam and he chickened out, got kind of sick, so he went back to Vermont and spent a year with his father. Then he found out that St. Johnsbury Academy in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, had a reciprocal agreement with Amherst where if you took a course at St. Johnsbury for a semester, then you could get into Amherst without taking the entrance exam. So Calvin went to St. J's for a semester and then got into Amherst, and he didn't flourish at first. He was blackballed from the fraternities there, but as time went on, his fellow classmates realized that he was a special guy, and he got into a fraternity, and he was even selected to give the Grove Oration, which was the student address at their graduation at the end of his time in college. And then he became an attorney. He read the law. He didn't go to law school. That was more common in those days. He just went to a law firm and apprenticed basically for a few years and became a lawyer, and then immediately launched into his political career. He started at the very bottom of the ladder on the city council in Northampton, Massachusetts, and he held a succession of local offices. He was the city solicitor, the lawyer for the city. He was the clerk of the courts in Hampshire County, Massachusetts. He ran for school board in, I believe, 1904 and lost that election, the only election he lost, and they said that he lost that election because he didn't have any children. But then he said, might give me time. And then after he married Grace and started having babies, he never lost another election. But then he served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives for a few years, came back to Northampton and was mayor of Northampton, and then was elected to the Massachusetts Senate and became Senate president in 1914, and in 1916 was elected lieutenant governor of Massachusetts, and then in 1918 he was elected governor of Massachusetts. And then you mentioned earlier the Boston police strike, which was very pivotal in launching Coolidge onto the national stage. It was very jarring and impactful event where the Boston police officers went on strike, and Coolidge had to come in and restore order in the city of Boston. And then the Republicans made him their vice presidential nominee in 1920 with Warren Harding, and the Harding ticket won, and then Harding dies in 1923 and Coolidge becomes president.
All right, now let me show this picture. I think I can hold it up so it shows. I'll just cover myself. Yes. All right. Want to talk about this picture, Rashad?
Yes, that's from the day before Calvin Coolidge was sworn in as president of the United States. He was in Vermont on vacation visiting his father, and Grace was there as well. And the president, Warren Harding, was out in California at the time on a Western tour, and he died very suddenly. And it took a little while for word to get back to Vermont that Harding was dead, and it was sort of wired to White River Junction, and then it got to Bridgewater, and then a messenger came up from Bridgewater, Vermont, to Plymouth Notch.
That's kind of an
middle of the
interesting
night,
story.
and knocked on the door, and Colonel John answered the door. It was about midnight on August 3rd, 1923. Knocked on the door and told Colonel John that his son was now president, and went upstairs and woke Calvin and Grace. And then 2:47 a.m. on August 3rd, 1923, the president was sworn into office by his father, Colonel John Coolidge, who was a notary public.
And thought he had the power to do that. So
yeah,
he did.
someone asked him what did he think gave him the authority to swear in a president, and he said, "Well, no one ever told me that I couldn't." So yeah, and it was this really iconic scene that people really, it was very evocative for people, and not just that, but the whole Plymouth Notch as a part of Calvin Coolidge's story. So people in those days were moving from the farms into the cities, and they still had memories of the times in the past when everyone lived on the farm, and you know, that bucolic lifestyle. And Coolidge and his campaign managers in the 24 election in particular really played up the Vermont farm,
right,
you know, heritage of Calvin Coolidge.
The simple good life.
Right, right.
Yeah.
While his opponent in 24, John Davis, was vacationing on a golf course in Maine, old Calvin Coolidge was up on the farm in Vermont, you know.
And when he was president, he spent his summers at Plymouth Notch, right?
Well, he spent one summer, the summer of 24,
summer.
Yes, but he came back and visited many times. But he went to a lot of different places throughout his presidency. Like one summer was spent in upstate New York in the Adirondack Mountains. Another summer was spent in Wisconsin.
He got out of the heat of Washington.
Yes, yes. And the most iconic summer was spent in South Dakota in 1927. And he was made an honorary member of the Sioux tribe, and they named him Chief Leading Eagle. So,
very, very
yes.
good. Okay, well, thank you, Rashad. That's a good overview with detail. Diane Campbell is the education coordinator for the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. Diane, so you have the responsibility of getting out the word. What do you stress in your educational presentations?
I think first off is that the story is just so interesting.
I think it is
to invite people in to the stories and to the place, and whether they are school children, whether they are the parents who came along on the trip, whether they are visitors to the site in the seasons. Often when we have school groups, there's other people that come along with us too. But
do you have tour buses too that come?
Well, Bill does the tour. Bill does
Okay.
the tour buses.
Okay.
But I do the school groups. And by the way, Rutland is coming next week.
Good.
We have 7 classes from Rutland.
That's great.
They come every
It
year.
is so close.
Yes, it is. It is. And it's, first of all, it is such a beautiful place. So
It is
it's
gorgeous.
So that makes it easy to draw people in, because you just stand there and you look all around, and the whole historic district is preserved. It's not just the street where the buildings are. And I present it as as Bill said earlier, that we're going back in time, that we can go into the houses, see what life was like. We can go into the barn, see the tools that did the work back then. So there is just so much to look at and to talk about. So we have when school groups come, we have them in small groups, and we have wonderful volunteers. And this is a pitch right now, if anyone is interested in doing this. We have many times it's retired teachers. But you don't have to be. If you love history and you like sharing that with children, please get in touch with me. So usually when we have our school groups, we have about 6 or 7 students to an adult, and their teacher or a parent along with them. So we can really have a conversation when we're walking around.
And that's what I like about it. It's a walking around
It
kind of
is,
story,
it is.
right?
And it's amazing that you can see the village from one end to the next, but we really allow about 3 hours altogether. Not everyone can spend that long, but there's the museum, which is amazing.
It is.
And then there's the cheese factory, and there's, of course, the birthplace and the homestead. And
the birthplace is a room.
It is. You stand there.
It's a room with a bed.
Yes, yes. And so as you bring that up, a lot of what makes it interesting is the comparison of life then and life now. Many times there are similarities, and one of the things that I also try to weave into the story, because it is a story. It is such a compelling story, and the story has many ways to tell it, but is the civic information of just how people live together in a community. And I think that Coolidge got that background from living there. And his father was so involved in the community. He ran the store. He was the supervisor of the highways. He was the school superintendent, maybe not all at the same time.
But he ran for elective office too, didn't he?
Oh, yes, yes.
So maybe
he was in the legislature,
maybe his son
right.
picked up on that and decided,
Yes,
well.
and in Coolidge's autobiography, which is a wonderful introduction to to his story, he talks about going to the town meetings. And so he went with his father when he collected taxes. So he, as a little boy and young man, he grew up seeing how a community works. And I think that had to have such a strong influence on him, and that he's a part of that community and he can contribute, and also that there are many different kinds of people in this community. And I think that's one of the things that made him such a good president, is that he really had that respect for all different kinds of people. So this is part of the story. There's just so much that we can bring out.
You've been doing this for a number of years, and you know your stuff, right?
I am
How many
years?
years?
This is, I think, 8 years.
Okay.
I was a classroom teacher. I taught different grades in elementary school for 30 years. And then I happened to see this ad in the paper. I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting.
Yes.
And it's been just a wonderful thing to do.
No, you have an enthusiasm.
I enjoy
clear.
it. I enjoy it. My husband calls it Coolidgeizing again. Because
At home sometimes you Coolidge.
Well, someone will ask me like a simple question, and I go on and on. But it is just, it's so compelling. And one of the views of history is that it's an expanding story. It's an expanding narrative. So it isn't like we just know this and then we're done. We keep learning and we keep making connections. And so with my work with students or with adults or with anyone who comes through, it's a conversation of just the things that we notice, how we relate it, and then how we keep learning. The other day in the office, we were talking about
47 seconds.
Oh, President Obama just spoke at Howard University. Well, Coolidge spoke at Howard University at a time when that was a very daring thing to do. It was the time of the Klan. So we have that connection.
You can bring in present history as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot to it.
Great. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Rushad.
Thank you, Mary.
And thank you so very much for watching. Go to the Notch. You'll love it.